People have been talking about aliens and UFOs for decades, but just this year, we've had a congressional hearing and a NASA press conference on UFOs, and reports from Peru and Mexico of actual physical evidence of little green men, of aliens. Look, it would take a lot for me to make an episode about aliens, but I think we've just hit that threshold. So let's put on our our investigative hats and figure this all out together. I'm Ricky, and this is 2-Bit Vinci. This video is sponsored by Sustainability Sooner. Let's start with what we know. July 26, 2023, David Grush, former intelligence officer for Pentagon UAP Task Force, gave testimony to the House Committee on Oversight and Accountability under oath. First of all, we got to talk about this first part. UFOs are kind of out of fashion. They've kind of got a bad rap. So there's a new term, UAP, or unidentified aerial phenomenon. Now, partly that's because not every phenomenon is flying, right? It's aerial. But anyways, new terminology, let's just start with that. Grush testified that he could not elaborate publicly on some aspects of his claims, but offered to provide further details and names, etc. to representatives in a sensitive, compartmentalized information facility, or SCIF. Grush claims that there are government conspiracies and secret capture, recovery, and reverse engineering programs going on since the 1930s. And he's even claimed that the US has recovered non-human biologic entities in recovered craft, alien bodies. While all of this is interesting and would have major impacts if true, there is nothing for us to look into since all of the investigations are going on behind closed doors, and really closed doors, like SCIF level secure closed doors. But David's wingman during the hearing, retired U.S. fighter pilot Ryan Graves and retired U.S. Navy Commander David Fravor, gave personal eyewitness testimony. A lot of this has to do with that Tic Tac incident where a perceived pill-shaped UAP was caught with Navy instrumentation and cameras during some operations. But again, there isn't really a lot to go on. The first thing we ought to start with is fraudsters and people looking for their 15 minutes of fame are always chasing book deals, right? For interviews and notoriety for something. This is never going to change. This is kind of the nature of the world we live in, where fame and notoriety come with great benefits like lucrative deals. And then there's always the question in my mind of disclosure. Governments are very deliberate about what they disclose to the public, right? In the interest of national security. In an ideal world, the reasoning for this is for our safety, yours and mine. But the truth can be somewhere in the middle. But ultimately, there's a level of strategy that goes on, right? For example, if the US was testing very advanced, top secret aviation technology and new aircraft platforms, they might be willing to let a couple of stories out to give people the sense of aliens in the interest of keeping people from digging too much further into what's actually going on. Very, very advanced aircraft, for example, which probably is the more likely scenario. But of course, none of this takes away from the fact that it could be aliens. It could be aliens with advanced aircraft technology visiting us from other planets. The first thing I'll say on this topic is if anyone ever says with 100% certainty that there are no aliens, or if anyone ever says with 100% certainty there are aliens, they're both wrong. There's really no way to be 100% sure. In this video, we want to try to bring a little bit of perspective and context, talk about the Drake equation, the general percentage odds that there are or aren't aliens, and really we're not trying to convince you of anything. We just want to try to bring a little bit of perspective to this. During all my research for this video, what I realized is there's kind of two schools of thought. Ronald Reagan once famously said that we should tell the public about aliens because nothing would bring people together like the threat of an extraterrestrial life form, right? The entire planet would be one. We would finally act like brothers and sisters and not draw lines in the sand in terms of race or ideology or anything else. It would bring people together. But then the second school of thought is that disclosing something like this would utterly tear the fabric of civilization apart because people would be panicking and afraid. They would stop going to work and there'd be rioting in the streets and just utter chaos, right? So ultimately, most directions when it comes to disclosing information about the unknown falls into one of those two schools of thought. Speaking of aliens and UFOs, have you ever seen the app Terra? I've seen it and even driven one and reserved it that night. And our sponsor this week, Sustainability Sooner, has an amazing sweepstakes you can enter for $48 for your chance to win an app Terra and $4,930 cash. And unlike me, who's probably 20,000 or 30,000 on the wait list, you would jump the line and get Aptera number 24, a spot normally reserved for big shot investors. Sustainability Sooner will pay Aptera Motors once they start production to build Launch Edition number 24, deliver it to the sweepstakes grand prize winner, and they'll even write a check for $10,000 towards taxes and fees. If Aptera doesn't produce Launch Edition 24 within 1 year of when the grand prize is announced, Sustainability Sooner will give the winner a solar electric off-grid tiny home or a Cyberlander custom Cybertruck camper plus 15 grand towards delivery and taxes. Sustainability Sooner is a fast forwarder of nature, green tech, and sustainable prosperity, an organization I'm proud to support. Check out the special link in the description to enter for a chance to win an Aptera today. Huge thanks to Sustainability Sooner and you for supporting the show. The second big news, and while we're making this video, is there was a NASA press conference. Now, for whatever reason, you throw the word NASA around, it just gives credibility, right? And that's the way I felt when I saw this. I was immediately intrigued. In June 2022, NASA established an external independent study team of 16 experts to find a way to use their open source data and resources to categorize and understand UAPs moving forward. It was part of the Department of Defense's All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, or the AARO. The goal was not to study past sightings or events related to UAP, but to assess how NASA could contribute to studying these phenomena in the future, using its vast array of resources and experience. NASA had a press conference on September 14, 2023, this year, about the findings of the team. The team concluded that there isn't enough scientifically verifiable evidence of alien technology. It doesn't mean it isn't alien, just that we don't have enough data to reach any other sort of conclusion. The problem is that the data that we do have was taken with instrumentation built for other purposes, whether it was RF signals in space or other telemetry instrumentation. It wasn't calibrated for this exact use case, so most of the data is not going to be exactly what we're looking for. Most of the sightings can be explained by normal man-made objects, optical effects on camera lenses, and glitches in instrumentation due to a lack of calibration. But there are a small fraction of things that are still inexplainable and unidentifiable. 171 characterized UAP reports, for example. In my opinion, NASA should take a leading role in scientifically studying these phenomena while being completely open and transparent about their findings, as they always have been. NASA has been one of those organizations that have been on our side, and hopefully with proper budgets and funding, they can do that. The report states that much of the available data around UFOs, UAPs, is classified, but not because of the data itself, but because it was recorded or taken with classified military instruments. So they don't disclose the evidence because it would reveal the country's defensive capabilities to foreign powers. We can't have that. So unlike data from Navy or DARPA or the other agencies out there, NASA might just be able to open source and tell us what they're finding because their research is based on data taken with non-classified instruments. The big takeaway from the NASA report, in my opinion, is that NASA should be outsourcing the remote sensing observation satellites to private companies that have high-resolution equipment pointed toward Earth, and that they could crowdsource data collection on the ground basically by using our smartphones. They suggested NASA could develop an app that we can download on our phones that would automatically record all possible sensor data as well as imagery when reporting a sighting. So the next time somebody pulls out their phone and says they saw a UFO in Kansas, well, their phone could be monitoring things like magnetic fields and maybe infrared spectrum and other things to make that sighting and that recording more credible. Just imagine how much of a game changer that would be if all of our smartphones could suddenly become data gathering devices, right? Because NASA would have large available amounts of data, including precision location, time, gravitational fields, electromagnetic fields, LiDAR sensing, potentially high resolution imagery, and more. And a lot of that stuff is available on most of our smartphones today. If nothing else, I think we can all agree that this shows us that NASA is finally taking UFOs and UAPs seriously. And I find that pretty exciting and encouraging. If we put NASA's vast resources, experience, and wealth of knowledge combined with massive amounts of high-quality data from crowdsourcing into cracking UAPs, I have no doubt we'll figure out the truth behind all of this sooner than later. It's a shame we don't have that data today, but I do think that we're going to have better looks into this in the future. Look what NASA accomplished with the James Webb Telescope. Despite being 10 times over budget and 14 years late, it worked perfectly and is already changing the way we see the universe. We recently discovered at least one exoplanet that could potentially hold life. Finally, we got to talk about the aliens that were being presented to the Mexican Congress. Jaime Maussan, a popular Mexican TV host and ufologist, that's actually a title, testified under oath at the Mexican Congress on September 12, 2023. He presented the mummified remains of 2 specimens of what he claimed were extraterrestrial beings recovered from an archaeological site in the deserts of Nazca, Peru. Apparently, they're the same remains that were discovered in Peru in 2017 and presented to the Peruvian Congress in 2018 by a team of scientists headed by biologist Jose de la Cruz Rios Lopez. They appear to have performed scientific verification using CAT scans and techniques like carbon dating and other expert testimony to try and prove the validity of their find, show that it's not a hoax or some forgery, and actually consistent with extraterrestrial life. They published their findings in 2021 in the International Journal of Biology and Biomedicine and concluded that it was a pregnant female specimen with scales on its skin, 3 fingers on each hand, walks on 2 feet, has no nose, has hollow bones, and was pregnant with 4 eggs in its belly. At the time, they hadn't done any DNA analysis or carbon dating, but they apparently flew the specimens to Mexico, where they did both analyses at the UNAM, which is Mexico's most prestigious university. Carbon dating put the mummies at 1,000 years old, and DNA analysis showed that 70% of the aliens' DNA is completely different from human DNA or from any other known living organism on Earth. So it had to be extraterrestrial. We'll show you why this doesn't really make sense in a minute, and you'll want to stick around for that. Trust me. In the meantime, it seems really hilarious how much these alleged aliens fit the stereotypes of Hollywood's little green men. But it got me thinking, was all of humanity's imagination inspired by actual aliens humankind had run into over the years and depicted in cave walls throughout the millennia? Or is everyone just happening to find evidence of the very thing imaginations conjured up? Why do people talk about UAPs breaking the known laws of physics as much as they do? It's because UAPs have shown some unique features. Performance that doesn't comply with known materials like near instantaneous acceleration and absurdly high g-forces. According to some estimates, some of these objects experience over 5,000 Gs. For reference, the FA-18 fighter jet can pull about 7.5 Gs, and that's a fighter jet. Another one is hypersonic velocities with no signatures, like sonic booms or observable friction with the air. So sonic booms are what you hear when an aircraft breaks the sound barrier. That's caused by a compression of the sound waves in the air in the front of the aircraft. UAPs don't seem to interact with the air at all, since they can accelerate from 0 to Mach 2 without a sonic boom. They're stealthy, they're very difficult to see or detect. Now this one will definitely intrigue imaginations, right? Have you ever heard of an aircraft that can fly through the air, splash into the ocean, and then take off again and then head into space? Those are 3 very different levels of engineering and physics, and they're hard to overcome, let alone in one aircraft, in one flight. Another thing is inexplicable flights with no thrusters, visible exhaust, or steering mechanisms, or obvious consumption of energy. This usually points to some sort of anti-gravity drive. And this was what intrigued people about the Tic Tac sightings that we will show here in a second. Almost half, 47% of sighted UAPs have the shape of a sphere, which isn't very aerodynamic, let alone control surfaces for changing where you're headed in flight. Even so, these spheres can travel through the air or stay perfectly still, even under high winds of 120 knots or 138 miles per hour. These are things that simply don't fit into our notion of how the universe works. And it's why UAPs are so scary and exciting to some people. It's also why most people think of them as alien technology. So let's try to break some of these ideas down a little bit. My first thought has always been the fact that nearly half of all observed UAPs are spherical is that most of these are probably experimental weather balloons, right? This is one of those things. If you have something floating in the air and not moving, screams weather balloon. Remember the story about the Chinese spy balloons that were flying over the US and Canada? Well, there's a lot of value and information that can be gleaned from these things. From a scientific perspective, if you can have a balloon that can just float because of a difference in buoyancy from the hot air inside compared to the air outside, and just stay loitering in the air for days or weeks at a time collecting atmospheric data, that information is huge. It's very expensive to gain otherwise, because if you have a winged aircraft, you have to propel it, or a helicopter, and that burns like hundreds of gallons per hour of fuel. And it's not an easy thing to do. For example, here's a little render that Juan cooked up that shows an object near an aircraft, and then the Earth, like the terrain, far away. Any little motion in the aircraft results in huge motion in the object that's close to it, perceived relative to the ground. This is parallax, and it gives people a weird illusion. In fact, I was on a plane recently, not to put on my tinfoil hat here, but I kind of saw this as well. There was some striking craft going underneath us, and it looked kind of blue in color, so I'm thinking maybe like a Southwest Airlines plane or something. But the fact that it was so close to us compared to the ground made it feel like it was going like 2,000 miles an hour, and it probably wasn't. But again, these are kind of the tricks and the weird explainable phenomena that happen when you're talking about objects in space and 3 dimensions. That brings us back to the little green men presented in Mexico. Now, this is interesting. These mummies from Peru had already been debunked before by the scientific community as an elaborate hoax consisting of a mix of human and animal bones glued together and covered in a fake reptilian skin. Presenting this as evidence under oath in the Mexican Congress and swearing it's all true doesn't make it so. They need to share samples with the independent scientific community at large to corroborate this data. And I'm talking labs around the world. Of course, if this is truly an alien, they need to be delicate and careful. Maybe it's better for people to fly in and take small samples and go back in the event that they lose it, but more testing has to be done. Ultimately, in science, all facts are laid down by a consensus of scientists working around the world, independently verifying information, not by the work of a single team of researchers. This kind of ties back to that video we did on the LK99 room temperature superconductor, which was kind of disproven because others couldn't also come up with the same findings, right? As Neil deGrasse Tyson eloquently put it when he was asked about the Mexican congressional presentation,
science is not established by single measurements or observations.
I'm not going to delve into how all the x-rays and CAT scans that were performed a couple of years ago were all debunked. Instead, I'll focus on 2 new pieces of evidence that Musan brought to Mexico, starting with the DNA analysis. Remember, researchers said that 70% of the specimen's DNA was unknown or foreign to evolutionary traits here on Earth. This tells me 2 things. A, these aliens have DNA, so they have the same building block structure of life that we do. And 2, that 30% of their DNA is the same as ours. And that's interesting. The fact that the creatures even have DNA to begin with is surprising to me. If we accept that these little lizard people are in fact aliens, that would mean that life happened to develop elsewhere in the universe based on the same genetic material, DNA. In other words, made up of the same 4 nitrogenous bases, adenine, guanine, cytosine, and thymine, and somehow happened to evolve into humanoid-looking organisms that walk on 2 feet and look a lot like us as far as aliens go. This seems a bit far-fetched, don't you think? Why would evolution and the genesis of life have to follow the same formula as it did here on Earth? Suppose we argue that we have the same type of genetic material because aliens came to Earth millions of years ago and seeded Earth with their DNA, and we eventually evolved into what we are today based on that original species. Although I'm not an evolutionary geneticist, I don't think that could be the case because we would share way more than 30% of our DNA. Now, that's an interesting theory, and that has been posited before. And I'm not an evolutionary geneticist here, but I probably don't think that would be the case because we'd likely share more than 30% of our DNA. Well, depending on when that evolutionary branch happened. If they visited us 3 billion years ago, then maybe, but it would depend upon some much more needed study. To put the DNA matching a little bit more into context, here's how much of our DNA we share with certain animals. We share 98% of our DNA with gorillas, 90% with cats, and 80% with dogs. Your pet dog or cat share about 80% of the same DNA as you. What makes us humans and them dogs or cats is only 10 or 20%. That's how much cousinship life on Earth share. But we also share 70% of our DNA with slugs and 60% with fruit flies, 50% with bananas, and 44% with honeybees, 38% with roundworms, and 24% with grapes and rice. So you mean to tell me that if a creature that happened to evolve somewhere else in the universe with all the same basic DNA structure as us happens to kind of look like us, yet our DNA is closer to a slug or a banana than that life form? It could be, but I'll let you decide. The second problem I have with this is carbon dating. How many of you guys actually know how carbon dating works? When people say this mummy was 1,000 years old, how on earth can we possibly know that? Well, it's all thanks to a technology called carbon dating. So let me explain. Most of the carbon in our body is a type of carbon or isotope of carbon called carbon-12, which is a stable atom. But there's also a small amount of radioactive carbon-14, radioactive to the tune of about 227 becquerels per kilogram, to be exact. But C14 decays naturally into nitrogen with a half-life of 5,715 years. That means that if we start with 100 atoms of C14, carbon-14, 5,715 years later, we would have only 50 atoms left. Carbon dating works by measuring how much C14 there is in a sample today and comparing it to how much it would have had when the specimen was alive. Since you know how fast it decays, you can determine how long it has been dead using the following equation. That's great, but how do we know how much carbon-14 there was to begin with? We know that thanks to the unique conditions of our atmosphere. There's lots of nitrogen in the air, and that nitrogen is converted into carbon-14 by cosmic gamma rays in the upper atmosphere. This replaces the carbon-14 lost to natural decay, making the concentration of carbon-14 on Earth, that is very important, constant. Living organisms exchange carbon-14 with the atmosphere through respiration or the food chain, and so they have a constant concentration of carbon-14 while they're alive. When they die, they stop taking up more carbon-14, and that's when the concentration starts to fall. This only happens here on Earth that we know of, thanks to the unique characteristics of our atmosphere being nitrogen-rich and being hit with gamma rays. So if you say this is an alien that came from another planet, there's literally no way of knowing how much carbon-14 it had in its body when it was alive, especially if you don't know what the planet it came from was and how much carbon-14 there would be in the atmosphere. So if this life form that actually is an alien came from a planet with twice as much carbon-14, well then this actually could be older than 1,000 years. Or if it came from one with less, it could be a lot younger. It doesn't make any sense. Carbon dating is a function of the environment plus organism, and it doesn't work if you can't put your finger down on both. If they carbon dated it, they must have assumed that it had the same initial amount of carbon-14 as us Earthlings, which is the opposite of saying that it came from another planet. That entire comment is literally a walking contradiction. Hopefully this has been a little bit insightful, but there's more to this story. The Peruvian mummies probably fake, but that doesn't mean that aliens don't exist, right? The absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. What about UAPs? Are they aliens or not? To try to answer that, let's start by thinking about how likely it is that aliens exist at all. The famous Drake equation proposed by Dr. Frank Drake in 1961 estimates how many intelligent alien civilizations there are likely to be in the entire galaxy, the Milky Way. Based on the average rate of star formation, the fraction of stars that have planets, the average number of planets in the Goldilocks zone of that star that have liquid water and can support life, as well as other factors, have estimated there must be between 1,000 and 100 million civilizations in the Milky Way galaxy alone. Just that many are likely to exist based on how many planets there are around suns and the right distance from the planet, just like Earth is. Cool. Pretty amazing, right? Multiply that number times the number of galaxies in the universe, as many as 2 trillion, and you have a minimum of 2,000 trillion alien civilizations. That's a minimum of 250,000 civilizations for every person living on Earth today. All this is to say that the odds that there are aliens in the universe is almost 100%. It would be really, really unlikely that there would be no other life. But it's also very improbable that we'll ever meet any of these people from other planets because of the vast distances between us and the nearest stars, unless we discover some kind of new physics, like a dark energy generator or something. I don't know. There must be some sort of physics we don't know about because there's too much of the universe we still don't understand. Modern physics can only explain 4% of all the forces driving the universe. We don't understand dark matter, which accounts for 85% of the mass of the known universe. And we don't have a clue about dark energy, which is what's driving the galaxies to speed up away and spread out, getting further and further apart. So it's not enough that we are so isolated from all other galaxies and planets and stars, but we're getting further and further away because of dark energy, a force that was posited that we still don't truly understand. This made me think of a question my son asked me recently. He was talking about traveling, and I said, how amazing is it that we can get on a plane and go to the other part of the world, right? And he asked me, he said, Daddy, what did people do before planes? Like, how would you go to the other side of the world? And I told them, you wouldn't, right? I'm told that we had ships and you can go to the other side of the world in like a year. You would literally be stuck on your little part of the world. That is the entire existence. Like, you would literally have just been stuck in your little speck of dirt on this planet. And the rest of the world, our own planet, would have been a complete mystery. There would have been people on the other side, on islands, on other continents that you would never have known about. And all that changed with air travel and ships, like on the ocean. Then suddenly the world became smaller. And now I can hop on a plane and be in India on the other side of the planet from California in about 20 hours. It's pretty amazing. But it's kind of the same thing here. There very well might be, and forever there might have been, entire organizations and galaxies. It might be an entire Star Trek Federation out there that we'll never know about because of just how far away we are. Ultimately, it comes down to this. One of them has to crack the levels of physics and engineering and understanding to be able to build ships and vessels. They have to figure out dark energy, dark matter. Maybe they've gotten wormholes. They can bend space and time itself. Things that we just barely understand at this point. Forget about mastery of or dominion over. And until then, yeah, we're going to be absolutely alone on this pale blue dot. I'll leave you guys with one final story. One of my favorite authors and human beings in the history of our planet is Carl Sagan. He is one of my favorites. I've read everything he's written. Pale Blue Dot is a must-read. Definitely go check that if you haven't. Another one is A Demon-Haunted World, How Science is a Candle in the Dark. And in A Demon-Haunted World, Carl Sagan has this brilliant story. He says, imagine if a friend of yours comes up to you and says, hey, I have this flying dinosaur in my garage. You'd go, cool, I want to see it. But then he goes, oh, actually, you can't see it. He's invisible. Well, you might say, okay, he breathes fire. I'll get an infrared camera and monitor the infrared. Oh, he's completely blue, like meaning there's no heat coming out of it. It's a cold flame. He's cold-blooded. You can't detect it with infrared. Then you might say, okay, well, I'll sprinkle some chalk on the floor and measure his footprints. Oh, he hovers. At some point, you would go from excited and curious to, I don't care. If I can't monitor it, if I can't observe it, if I can't make any sense of what you're saying, why should we continue to have this conversation?
But science is more than a body of knowledge. It's a way of thinking, a way of skeptically interrogating the universe with a fine understanding of human fallibility. If we are not able to ask skeptical questions, to interrogate those who tell us that something is true, to be skeptical of those in authority, then we're up for grabs for the next charlatan, political or religious, who comes ambling along.
Until there's some better information, some better insight that would allow us to communicate about whatever it is you're talking about, it's kind of a fool's errand. And that's where aliens and UAPs and UFOs have always landed for me. Personally, I would need to know more. I want to see a iPhone 15 high-res footage of something. I want to see actual remains that aren't glued together from living things on Earth. I want to see actual data, actual presented science that would change my tune. Until then, I'm in the belief that, yeah, there probably are aliens. And honestly, most of us have to grapple with the fact that we'll never encounter them in our lifetimes. And if I'm wrong and they're friendly, then that would be great. And if they're not, well, then it's Independence Day, right? Ultimately, we just don't know. And that is a look at what's going on and a little bit of the science and contextual information about why we're making this episode. And if you guys thought that was cool, sound off in the comments below. Let us know what you think. This is a conversation I've just started. It's kind of a can of worms I've opened, but I'm really looking forward to seeing your comments down below. All right, if you thought that was cool, check out that video next. And until next week, I'm Ricky Da Vinci. We'll see you later.